I did want to just add that, you know, the person who in the documentary for Woodstock said the women basically, you know, they kind of had it coming because they were walking around topless or because
that's such a garbage argument. And I'm really
his
tired of
statement
that.
a bit like it shouldn't happen, blah, blah, blah. But the women something.
If only the women weren't topless.
Yeah, or at least responsible for a bit of it is something along the lines of what he said, which is utterly disgusting, especially given the fact that this guy was a promoter for the event. Like he was ultimately liable for it.
Responsible,
right? He put it on. And then on top of that, this guy is also one of the co-founders of Woodstock. He threw Woodstock 94, which was peaceful and whatnot, and Woodstock 69. So doesn't that make you king hippie? Like we were just talking about, you know, hippies and
a hippie transitioning into capitalist.
Right. So you're throwing this capitalist thing. The whole reason they put it out on an Air Force base was because it had a barbed wire fence around it, so you could stop people from just coming in. You on top of that, you didn't let them in with water or food, but they could bring in all the drugs and alcohol that they wanted.
And people ultimately broke that down anyway and broke in, which is why there were so many more people there than what they calculated. What they planned for. Oh yeah, people broke down all that shit. There was no, we're gonna stop the crowd. How could you stop the crowd? The yellow shirts were outnumbered like 8-1.
And they did mention in the documentary that the security team was a lot of them just like had to take like a really easy test to get certified, and that was it.
They weren't reaching for the creme de la creme of like national security for this event, right? Like it was a fucking concert, and they figured, you know, the people who bought the tickets would show up. They had enough food and water supply for that. They didn't calculate the fact that people were going to bum rush this shit and, you know, light the place on fire within 24 hours. I mean, they just didn't. Again, they gave these white boys the benefit of the doubt because they come from upper middle class if they're swinging $300. But what they forget is that, first of all, just because you're upper middle class doesn't mean you're pissed. You're not pissed. Second of all, a lot of working class people saved their money and bought these tickets and went there, you know, expecting a good time. Like there was a lot of different types of white boys there. I mean, was it a white boy summer event? For sure. Were they all rich? Absolutely not. So it's easy to dismiss that, you know, young white guys just hold the salt of the earth in their hands. And there is no disputing that to some degree they absolutely do. And there's no argument against that. And we know that based on the distribution of wealth. Having said that, it doesn't mean that they don't have legitimate issues in their homes. And part of those issues, as we were discussing earlier, was that this is the generation of latchkey kids who have now graduated from college and are going out into the world and about to find out, you know, what am I going to do? They've watched both of their parents work all of their lives and realized that from all that work, they basically got a house, which is a level of privilege again, right? It still is a level of privilege, but they realized that that basic, which is bottom end privilege, of owning a home came at the price of both of their parents being gone their whole lives. And I don't think that generation wanted to graduate college and walk out into the world and do that. So they are the precursor to the idealism that comes with the millennial generation and Gen Z, which has shifted how people view corporations and how people view spending. Like now, Gen Z wants to know where companies stand on activism, where they stand on civil rights, how they stand on equity and diversity. Well, that didn't start with this generation. It really started with the generation of the 60s. And each generation moves that needle forward. So even though these kids didn't have, which I'm a part of that generation of the Woodstock 99, even though there was no war, there was an internal war. There was one in the home, the separation, the breakdown of the family. And they love to talk about the breakdown of the black families, but guess what? A lot of white families broke down too, whether it's because both parents were working or because parents got divorced at a much higher rate. And because women are working now, they could leave their fucking husbands, who they couldn't leave before when they were surviving on a single income. So with women earning money comes more options. And one of those options is I don't have to put up with a bullshit man. I'm making money. I won't starve. I won't be rich, but I'm not going to starve to death either. And women can always make it happen. If we have to have 2-3 hustles going on, we're going to eat. We're going to find a way to feed those kids, even if we don't eat. Men, again, not held to that same level of responsibility. Nobody says to the men, wow, you're working so much. How much time do you spend with your kids? So the 80s and the 90s is an emergence of most women work in working class families of any race. And these 2-income families now require kids to go home alone or walk home with their classmates and walk home with their friends. And those kids whose friendships become sort of the nucleus of their lives turn into the 4 girls walking in Sex and the City, right? Because again, that's my age. So you see how you don't see them with their sisters and their cousins and their parents hanging out in the show. You see them hanging out with each other. Because now your friends have become your nucleus more so than your families, because you're spending more time with your friends than you are with your families. Like, it all connects. Now you're coming from a generation of kids where 50% of families are divorced. You're not odd kid out anymore. And that includes white families. So kids are pissed. They graduate college. A lot of them have debt. They're working. They have part-time jobs. Their parents have worked their asses off, and they're starting at minimum wage jobs coming out of college. This is kind of like part of the anger. You know, it's part of the rage against the machine. It's part of they were educated enough to understand what exploitation was, but helped move the needle forward on, well, how do we stop that? And then in the next 2 decades, what do you see? You see the anti-Wall Street movements, right? The 99% movements. You see the Anonymous coming out. You see like all these kind of derivatives of this generation and the prior generations. I mean, there are always activists in every generation who are trying to move it forward and understand exploitation. But at the same time, the lens from which they see it from changes depending on context of what's happening in the world at the time. If there's no war going on, there's no war. What can you do? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that you don't understand the impact of neither your parents being home when you come home from school every day. So it was a miscalculation on a lot of different levels, but it all still comes down to sheer benefit of the doubt that they're white boys, and no matter how bad it gets, it's never going to get that bad.
Right. Yeah, it's never going to get that bad. Same thing that happened to January 6th. And just, again, 2-hour documentary to pick apart and go through with a fine-tooth comb and find every other reason other than the fact that these guys are just savages when you let the leash off.
Yeah. How about just admit they're savages and they weren't raised right, and somehow along the way in the fucking parenting they got, somebody forgot to teach them not to rape women. How about that? So what, if every woman in the world was wearing sweatshirts, no one would get raped? Is that the theory?
Because we got news for you.
It seems to be the one thing in the world that all men agree on is that women are second-class citizens. Fascinating how the whole species of men have been able to unite around one issue and one issue alone, and that's the one.
It's a very good point. These motherfuckers will kill each other over anything else.
Anything else other than women are equal to us. No, not a single man in the world has died on that sword. And there's not a country in the world where women have equal rights to men. Wow, look at that. Regardless of race, creed, or religion, somehow men agree on that.
So one fucking thing they can agree on.
It's the one fucking thing. They're all like, cheers on. Lucky us, huh? Lucky us women.
We'll fight a decades-long war over literally everything else.
Yeah, literally everything else there's been a war about, except that.
But keeping these women in their place.
We all agree on.
Wow.
Black, white, yellow, Puerto Rican, and Asian.
Fuck.
United.
Fascinating.
And on that note, thanks for joining us for another episode of Raw Food.